we are going to introduce safety even if it costs me something, and safety will always cost me something.
Good.
But on the other side of that cost is a freedom in relationship that you will not get without pressing into that, because otherwise you will stay stuck at probably a 5 or a 6 or a 4 to 6 in your range of intimacy in your marriage, and you'll never get beyond, because with suffering comes perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. Like, our ability to press through those moments are what bring hope and joy and peace and love and character, right? Like, that's what's on the other side of doing that.
You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christi Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. Today we are in part 2 of 5 of a 5-part series. Yeah, right. 2 of 5. That means it is a 5-part series on cultivating an emotionally healthy marriage. Ladies, I just want to start with this. Tender and fierce. The signups are going well. We're so excited about this coaching cohort with Christi. It begins August the 7th. Wednesday nights, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. The course, the community, it is an incredible group of women. You can read the testimonies from the previous cohort on the website. We put that in the show notes today. The registration deadline is coming up, so we would love for you to sign up for that. I also want to mention here, as we do these series on marriage in this summer series, we are putting together a PDF download for small groups. This one in particular, as it relates to marriage, highly recommend you go through it with your spouse. There's conversation starters and questions and ability to take notes and some prayers and things like that in this workbook. We put that in the show notes. It is free for you to download as you navigate these five episodes in this particular series on cultivating an emotionally healthy marriage. Today, we're talking about emotional safety in marriage. This is the hub of the wheel of everything that we do, and we really want you to be able to enter into this conversation, take notes, understand what emotional safety looks like, why it's important, and it does set the stage for every other episode that we have coming up, because we're going to be talking about hard things, talking about difficult things in marriage. We're going to talk about sex, money, in-laws, all these things, and emotional safety is the hub of the wheel that sets up every other conversation that we have in marriage. When we feel safe, that's when we can truly grow. And so that's what this conversation today is about. So would you join me in our conversation about emotional safety in marriage? We're in a little series right now on marriage. This week, we're going to talk about the atmosphere of marriage and what it looks like to cultivate emotional safety in the context of marriage, because we genuinely believe that it is the environment or the atmosphere from which we can have every major every conversation where there's an elephant in your marriage. And we'll talk a little bit about what an elephant is in your marriage. And so today we just want to set the tone for how you have difficult conversations as it relates to money, as it relates to sex, as it relates to in-laws, as it relates to where do we vacation, as it relates to one person being a dreamer and the other person not being a dreamer, and so on and so forth. And so what does that look like? What does that mean?
And okay, so let's talk about what is emotional safety, because that might be a new term for a lot of people, but it's so, so, so important. And we want to sort of set the stage for why that is and what that would look like in a marriage, what it doesn't look like, and then how to cultivate it, how to build it, because it's not fixed. It's something that can grow, especially when you're aware of what it is. We talk about it with kids a lot, and we can point you to like earlier episodes in the show notes of where we've talked about that with kids and how we develop that even as parents within our home. But how do we do that in a marriage? I don't know that we've ever done a specific episode on that, but emotional safety really is the thing that allows our entire nervous system of our entire bodies to be safe enough at home with people that we love in order to grow, in order to heal, in order to dream, in order to have clarity of thought, in order to connect, to be curious and to be calm. So it's really important, but I would love, can you define emotional safety?
Yeah, and there's 2 places I'd love for you to go to check out if you want to learn more about emotional safety. One is a book called Safe House, How Emotional Safety is the Key to Raising Kids Who Live, Love, and Lead Well. That's the parenting side of it. We'll put that in the show notes. And then also our new book, Famous at Home, 7 Decisions to Putting Your Family Center Stage in a World Competing for Your Time, Attention, and Identity. That talks about emotional safety, how to really talk about emotions and set that stage and how to cultivate that atmosphere. So make sure you get those 2 resources if you want something beyond today's episode. That idea of emotional safety really comes down to the posture. It's more of a posturing. It's like you experience it, you feel it. When it's there because you can truly be yourself. And the way that I define it in Safe House is love minus fear equals emotional safety or equals a safe relationship. So love minus fear. But anytime where does that come from? So in neuroscience research, Dan Siegel talks about this where he writes about how in attachment, we must be open to ourselves and create an environment of love minus fear in order to show up well. And in the Bible, it says, right, perfect love casts out what? Fear. I think the opposite of love is fear. It's not hate it's more like apathy, right? It's like being apathetic. But we become apathetic by living in fear.
Yeah.
And so when there's a fear-based home, when you're living in fear, when you don't know what you're going to get, that's the opposite of safety. That's not the posture of safety. Safety is when I can truly be myself. I don't have to dance around a subject. I don't have to. And there are times where the 2 of us, where it's like, we have to dance around each other. I mean, we're not always safe. Like there's not like a house, I think, that is one. I don't think there's I think in relationships, there's opportunities for emotional unsafety. And I think one of the best places to start is by asking your spouse, where do I not feel safe with you? But you have to also be open to have that conversation. You have to really set the context for that so that you're not getting defensive. Because if you're getting defensive, like if Christi asks me, or if she says to me, where do you feel unsafe? What do I do that makes you feel unsafe?
Yeah.
In order for her to ask that question, she has to be willing to receive the answer in a way where she's not getting defensive, which in turn makes me feel more unsafe because my limbic system goes off, my fight, flight, or freeze response, and then all I'm doing is defending myself by attacking her or by withdrawing, and it makes the environment even more unsafe from the context of which we have any conversation. And so that's why we have to talk about safety, is because you can't talk about sex, in-laws, money, or any of these other hot topics until you feel safe enough to be able to really have them in a way that you're not both of you defending yourselves and protecting your own hearts.
And you may even need to pause on that. I think that's so good. But what feels unsafe to you will be very different than the next person. And I think we typically might use that term for is if they're abuse of some sort. It's not that. I mean, obviously that can make you feel very unsafe, but it's way more than just that. It's more of a sense of, like Josh said earlier, that being able to be your full self, but to not have to hide parts of you, if that makes sense. So I can come to you and I can ask a question like that that's really vulnerable. And I feel okay that you aren't going to start to attack me. You aren't going to start to criticize me, put me down, judge me, belittle me. But there's a lot of ways we do that without realizing that's how the other person has received it. And that's why that question's so powerful, because we have to be willing to see how our reactions are affecting the other person, even though we think we're doing them it feels kind in our hearts. It feels loving. We're not trying to be hurtful in any way. Certainly, we're not trying to make them feel unsafe. And I think that there's a lot of power in using that word, because that's on the person. We have no control over that. If someone feels unsafe I remember I used to date a guy who came from a family where they were very combative, verbally, they'd love to debate, maybe is the better word.
First time I've ever heard this story.
Well, it's not really a story, except the fact that I would sit there with my eyes wide as like, this feels horrible. Like, it feels like they're all yelling at each other. They love to debate. And I felt so unsafe. Like, that to me was not, they grew up in that environment and they felt safe enough in it that they were fine. I was not fine. I hated it. I felt super unsafe. I mean, we'll just use that term. I just felt unsafe. Not that they were doing anything to me, but my body, my nervous system did not feel safe in that environment. And so you have to be aware of like our families of origin, how we've grown up, our core wounds, childhood wounds, the things that we've carried in. And that's going to be so unique. And that's when we talk about the inner child defending. My job is to defend the little boy inside of Josh and to care for him and love him and nurture him and recognize when he gets triggered and he doesn't feel safe because I have criticized him, I have been short with him, or I have come down hard on him, or I have
well, and the reality is, this happened today. So, we're in a difficult season. And so this is what I'm talking about in relation to, you listen to the podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, like these guys are safe for each other. And yes, 30,000 foot view, generally speaking, we are safe for each other. Like we are very safe for each other, but there are moments. And then there's some of you listening, you're like, well, that's not us. The environment of our marriage is not safe. So we're going to talk about ways that we can do that here in a minute. But for a lot of other people, it's generally speaking, we feel safe, but there are moments where we're not. And those moments tend to really take us down a notch in how connected we feel in our relationship. And so we're just in a difficult season right now. And so today was a difficult day, and just being all transparent. And so when I went out into the kitchen and I said, Christi says, hey, let's just go for a little walk. And I was too amped up to want to go for a walk. I was just, going for a walk was not going to fit in the schedule of the day in order to get everything accomplished that we needed to. My mind was going in 1,000 directions, just feeling a little bit overstressed. And the way I came across to her of going, no, we're not going to go for a walk, was the way she received that was, you can talk about how you received that.
Well, it just felt like you were coming
at
unsafe.
Me.
Yeah, you were coming at me. And I was like, I just was trying to suggest like something to help. And so, but it doesn't take much, right? Like that little response is actually a great example, because it was just the way he responded. I was like, whoa, like why?
Which in turn, then when she confronts me about it, makes me feel like make me feel unsafe, because then that carries into however you're receiving it, you're taking it personally, you're perceiving it personally. And so therefore it's like she's holding that against me, and then I feel unsafe in that moment. And then that's just something that now we're both feeling unsafe, and we're carrying that forward, which is a message to me that tells me I don't feel safe having a stressful day in front of Christi. So that means I have to go somewhere else to have a stressful day, because she can't handle my stress, because she's going to perceive it as an attack against her. And sure, I probably did come across towards her as a little bit strong, but I was doing that because I was just having a rough day. But you see how those moments can take us and tell us messages. Like the message I then tell myself is, I can't have a stressful day in front of Christi because it's not safe to do that. And then we end up just spiraling out of control. And if you don't pay attention to those moments and come back and discuss them like we are live on a podcast,
the best way to do it.
If you don't come back and discuss them though, and bring them out into the light, these issues become elephants in your marriage. And then that's when the bigger issues start to compound. That's when elephants come in, like sex, money, drugs, rock and roll. I'm just kidding. But like in-laws, all those things. Then you can't have if I can't have conversation with Christi about the stress of my day, how in the world am I going to have a conversation with her about sex, or about her parents, or my parents, or our kids and parenting, and all of the stuff that is even bigger and feels even weightier? That's what we're talking about here in terms of how we can create that posture of safety where there's love, and as Christi said, pursuing the inner child of the other person.
Well, but that's a great point. But we don't cognitively recognize that we are afraid to have that conversation the next time. It's just our nervous system is like, don't know. Like something bad happened last time. You don't actually have to remember why, but you're just like, like you will avoid it. You will start to dismiss it. And we wonder why we get so overwhelmed and feel nothing. And we numb out with all in all the ways that we try to do it. And it's because our poor nervous system is just so overwhelmed with the messages of it's not safe. It's not safe. So we divert and we avoid and we do all the things to just avoid feeling that unsafe emotion. I think that feeling is probably the root of most of our, what we would call negative feelings. It didn't feel safe to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel scared. Those aren't necessarily bad things, but it didn't feel safe to feel them or to feel them in a relationship or to communicate them. So we've learned to hide them. And then we find ourselves years later wondering why we're struggling with whatever it looks like when it comes out sideways. If that's depression, anxiety, rage, all the things. And so it's so helpful, I think, to distill it down to safe, unsafe. What feels safe to me and what feels unsafe? Because what you have to start to try to do is introduce safety back into the system. So safety back into the relationship where I realized that was just one time. It was one thing. And it's not that I actually think he is against me. It's not that I actually think he has negative anything toward me. But that one little instance, my body remembers and will keep coming back to like, be careful, until I start to introduce safety back into the system where I let I keep referring to the body. It's because the body is what remembers, like your physical body. A lot of you maybe have heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score, where it talks about trauma that's stored in the body. That's like a classic. There's so many other resources it's so helpful to understand though, because it's stored in the body. It's not that your mind even necessarily remembers the exact examples. It's that it's stored. And so it responds that way until it's taught a more adaptive way. So when we can replace it with a more helpful adaptive response, it will pick the more adaptive one every time. So if we have this conversation and I can realize I can replace the old and we can sit down and have this conversation. We're like, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize my reaction to you made you feel unsafe to share with me when you're having a stressful day. I don't want that. I want you to be able to tell me when you're stressed, but could you do it in a way that makes me feel safe? So, and I do realize you were just overwhelmed in the moment and it just came out at me. And I'm also a big enough person that I can take that. It just triggered me in the moment. So I want you to know, I want you to tell me next time is. And then he can respond in kind. But do you see how it starts to reset? My whole body starts to calm down as I'm telling him my intentions, what I really wanted and what I want for us. It's those pro-relationship thoughts. Like I want for us to be safe for one another, to be a great sounding board when we're stressed, to be able to handle it. And you don't even need to fix it. I just need you to hear me when I'm stressed or worried or whatever. And that's what I think the power of introducing safety in a way that like right now, this is just conversational. Another way we did it is I was like, I need to step outside. I just need to go outside. So we just both went outside and sat in the sun. And just that alone, those are like really basic, beautiful ways that God has created us to be able to calm our nervous systems and tell them they are safe. But you have to intentionally replace what was unsafe with safety back into the system.
And that's what I tell couples a lot. Like if people are in an argument late at night, typically late at night is not a time. Everyone's tired. It's not a time. So introduce safety at some capacity. Fall asleep holding hands. Step outside into the moonlight and just breathe in the air. Do something that interrupts the limbic system's activation to protect, to self-protect. And of course, you're going to want to feel like self-protecting. And even in these moments, like that's what we do. We self-protect and
First.
we want to. That's the priority. But as Christi said, the pro-relationship thoughts, when we ground ourselves in an us against the world attitude, that listen, we are going to come together and this is about our intimacy. This is about our connection. This is about us modeling for our children what true covenant relationship looks like, where we are not always on the same page, or we don't always feel like we're on the same team, but by golly, we're going to get back there.
By golly, we're going to
By golly, Miss Molly, we are going to get there.
We're going to get there.
And we are going to introduce safety, even if it costs me something. And safety will always cost me something.
Good.
But on the other side of that cost is a freedom in relationship that you will not get without pressing into that. Because otherwise you will stay stuck at probably a 5 or a 6 or a 4 to 6 in your range of intimacy in your marriage, and you'll never get beyond, because with suffering comes perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. Like, our ability to press through those moments are what bring hope and joy and peace and love and character, right? Like, that's what's on the other side of doing that. And yes, it takes each of us. Absolutely. I know there's some people listening and they're going, man, but my spouse is not safe, nor does he or she want to get safe. In that case, I encourage you for you to find a relationship, a counselor, who, not a relationship, not another relationship outside your marriage, but a counselor.
Just replace them.
Or
not what we're saying.
Yeah. Who you can talk to.
Yeah.
Somebody you can talk to, a safe person that you can rewire those connections of safety in your own life, because you want to get safe. You want to be safe. And
especially if you've been in a chronically unsafe relationship for a very long time, or you grew up in one, that's going to take some time for you to feel safe again. And that's a beautiful work that only you can do for you. That is one thing I want to make sure we do say. My safety is not dependent on him. My safety is dependent on God, first of all, because he is the one attachment figure that will never fail us, who is always safe. Sometimes we perceive him unsafe, but it's because we've seen through temporal eyes and not eternal eyes. But connecting to God is one of the most powerful ways to reestablish safety in your body. Being outside, journaling your emotions, doing grounding, literally bare feet on the ground, being in the sunshine, waking up, going out and looking at the sky first thing. And at night, walking, it's like that bilateral movement is super powerful. Bilateral tapping even is really powerful. If you've heard of EFT tapping, we can talk about that another time too. There's so many techniques and ways to ground yourself, to bring safety back into your system that have nothing to do with another person. And that is something every single one of us are responsible for and can do regardless of the situation we're in. And I would also say, especially if you're in a relationship that feels a little bit more on the unsafe side of the spectrum, as we're saying, there will always be unsafety in relationships with humans. It's just the way we are. We're sinful. We mess up. But we can move toward more safety and more predictable, because like Josh said earlier, it's when we don't know what we're going to get. And we're people, we have bad days, we have good days. Today was a bad day. And so, or it started off that way. And so that's not something we are ever required to be perfect at, obviously, but we have to have grace for other people, and we have to be able to come into it being whole enough ourselves that those little blips don't throw us down a big spiral. But when you're not in a good place, it's going to happen. And so we need to climb ourselves back up the ladder. And that's stuff we can do where we're calm, we're connected, and we're curious. That's when you know you feel safe.
Yeah.
If you are feeling anxious, avoidant, ambivalent, like where you actually drop down even further, where it becomes like numb, disconnected, basically depressed, that's a sign of chronic unsafety. Like you've felt unsafe for a really long time, and your body, your nervous system is really tired. So all the things that we do on the daily, and it's those little things that we can inject into our days that start to climb us back up, that keep us regulated and calm and connected and curious.
Look at the next rung up the ladder.
Yeah. And keep moving that way. And those are all things we do irregardless of the people in our lives. But then we add in the relational
Well,
component.
and I just want to say this too. We're not talking about physically unsafe. If you're in a physically unsafe
Right.
relationship, that requires you to seek therapy, seek guidance, and we're not saying to stay in a unsafe relationship. We're talking about the moments of emotional unsafety where we don't feel safe in the context of the relationship, and it makes us put up defensive walls, and it's inhibiting our relationship with one another. So
And I
I
think
just
like
want to make sure that we clarify that for those of you listening.
and that was a really great, think of the last time you felt that, what Josh just said, where you felt, it's almost like a caged animal where it feels afraid. And so you will react in self-preservation every time. That's your nervous system's numero uno job, is to protect you. So just recall the last time you remember feeling that with your spouse. If you're married, if you're not, with a friend or a family member, maybe it's a parent or a sibling, where you felt that self-defensive posture come in, and everyone's going to respond different. Maybe you got angry, maybe you got avoidant, maybe you go quiet. What else can we do?
Well, we can attack, we can withdraw, we use sarcasm, we use passive aggressiveness.
Ooh, that's good.
I mean,
Sarcasm is a good one, because that's a real subtle way that we've learned to adapt, but it's actually because we don't feel safe. So if you notice that starting to come out of you, but just go back to that place, because that's a really great example of where you can start to work from there. So, okay, I've realized like, I don't feel safe here. That's what it feels like right there. So recall that memory. That's what unsafety feels like. The opposite of it would be feeling that sense of fully welcomed in, right? Where there's just, if you can absolutely subtract fear and you are just allowed to drop all the defenses, like drop your shoulders, slow your breathing, look eye to eye in a person and have a conversation. For some people, you may actually not recall a time that you were able to do that, because relationships have been historically unsafe. So when you get face to face with a person, your shoulders creep up. You are on alert, but you're careful what you say. You might feel like that sense of like, flippy in your tummy, your heart's kind of racing, and a lot of people in that spectrum, you might call yourselves like, I'm an introvert, I just want to be alone. That just could be because you've found that people have been unsafe through your life. And there are ways that we can start to retrain your body that some people can be really safe, and in fact can cause you to grow and blossom. And that's the beauty of a safe relationship.
And I think from a marital standpoint, that's the beauty of the marriage.
Yeah.
Marriage is healing. Marriage is healing when you get two people who are willing to press through the unsafety to create that emotionally safe environment. But even as it relates to sex, let's say that, for example, let's use the topic of sex and how often we have sex. There's an intimacy, it's physical intimacy, but yet we're also coming in with baggage. There's physical pain that accompanies sex. There's shame that accompanies sex. There's, what feels pleasurable, what doesn't feel pleasurable that accompanies sex that we have to talk about in order to experience the full pleasure of sex and to be able to understand that. What feels comfortable, what doesn't feel comfortable, how often are we going to have sex, what is the best time of the day to have sex. Those types of conversations have to happen in order to have a vibrant sex life. But you also got to be able to have them and not just dance around them and pretend that they're not there and stay quiet and silent, because the sexual relationship then, as Christi's describing, what ends up happening is our body becomes wired then to protect itself, especially around sex. And then all of a sudden the sexual relationship isn't what you want it to be because it was birthed out of unsafety, or it's been living out of unsafety, because we don't talk about it.
Yep. And I think for a lot of women, especially who grew up in a Christian environment, and I'd say men too, but you see it more in women, that for those of us who were taught, like our friend, Pastor Ted Cunningham always used to say, the church would teach that sex is dirty, nasty, and wrong, and you should save it for the one you love most. And then you get married and it's like this green light, and we wonder why it's that these conversations feel unsafe. That
because you were trained to put it away. You were trained
We were
it was
trained
nasty,
to-
it was dirty, it was ugly. You should just save it for the one you love. And now all of a sudden the one you love is there and you're like, what do I do with this?
Yeah. So to all the women, I have a friend who works in this space, and she said, Chrissy, guess the percentage of Christian women who grew up like in the church, who struggle with, like, I don't even know how you really phrase that, but just like a shut down sexual response where they feel protective of themselves, and it's really hard for them to let go in marriage. And I was like, I don't know, like 70%. She said, I've literally not met one who doesn't. 100% of women who have been raised in the church. And I thought that was a really powerful, because I think it speaks a lot to what we're facing, but also what our children are facing and how we're raising them, maybe how we can do it better, because it has become such a such a strong conversation within the church. But now, generations later, I shouldn't say generations, maybe decades later, we're seeing the repercussions of the purity movement. And though it's beautiful in concept, the repercussions it's having on marriages now. And so to those that are listening that resonate with that, just know 100% of you are not alone. And that this is when we talk about safety, that's what the beautiful hope is that we can infuse safety back into a system that was taught this is not safe. And for right reasons, we understand what they were trying to teach us. But then how do we correct that in a body that's been integrated with one message? And so ways that we can do that is through conversation, where we actually start to talk. And this is where I think it gets, I don't know if tricky is the word, prickly maybe is the better word, because between husband and wife, these conversations trigger little parts of us so quickly that we get defensive really fast. And that's why what I said, going for a walk, being outside, doing things that we do to build safety into just having the conversation, holding hands, going shoulder to shoulder versus eye to eye, doing things that introduce safety into a conversation that intrinsically already feels unsafe to us is so powerful to put both at ease, but especially the one who's, their little girl or little boy is like freaking out about having this conversation.
Well, and I think
that's
too, one of the things you want to do is like, even like finding out like what time of the day, when can you schedule it? When can you, like, what feels safe in terms of like, does it feel unsafe if it's spontaneous?
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's
because
so good.
like that way, one person who's always initiating and the other person's always rejecting, what it does is it creates this cycle of the person who's always initiating is like, I might as well just give up. You don't even want to, you don't care about me. You don't love me. You don't want to do this. When the reality is it has nothing to do with that person at all. It has everything to do with that other person's history. Right. And so,
and they're guarding, right?
And
they're
how to get out of that pattern. Like you've got to
Yes.
have the conversations to get out of that pattern. Like what will feel safe? What feels safe to you to drop your guard so that we can enter into, having great sex.
I remember we
like,
talked about, do you remember we did, at our church, we did like we teach marriage for night school, and it's so it's so good. But we talked about scheduling sex. And I remember this one girl was like, you joking, right? And I was like, no, I'm actually not, because it introduced safety for people who are guarded. And it's like this, it actually introduced safety on both sides, but for those that are guarded and are like, and you don't realize you feel like this until I maybe say this in words and you're like, oh, I kind of feel like that. You're almost on your guard at all times around your spouse, because when the kids are in bed or like when it's safe to do so, if they initiate, like I'm constantly on edge, like this might happen. That's because it doesn't feel safe. It has nothing to do with your spouse. It has nothing to do with you and there's nothing wrong with you.
Unsafe.
That just has felt unsafe to you, and that makes sense. But so scheduling it allows your body to calm down so that you know it's coming up. You can actually prepare, and then your spouse knows. Again, your intention is like you want to connect with them, and you are putting it on, like prioritizing it, but in a way that they know it's coming and you still feel safe.
And that way you can also build up to it, because even scheduling it, you might be a person who's like, oh my gosh, I know that it's coming. And that's going to make me feel unsafe. At the same time, if you're leading up to it, like talk to your spouse about, and again, it has to us against the world, pro-relationship thoughts. I want us to connect. I want us to be deeper. What do you need from me leading up to that scheduled time that will help you get into the mood, that will help you feel more and more safe and less protective, so that we can have this conversation. This is what emotional safety is all about. It's having that conversation of love minus fear, so that we're taking the fear out of it, right? That we've not been given a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. And until we introduce in a loving way that power that we have over fear, we won't have a sound mind as it relates to conversations around sex or all these other hot topics. We've got to introduce that. And by the way, prayer is a fantastic way together, when you're praying together, that brings that limbic system down and helps you enter into the context of safety with one another. Prayer may even be a conversation you have to have because you feel afraid to pray together. Start rewiring your brain in how you feel safe and connected by simply praying together and pressing into it and feeling safe around it and encouraging one another around it. Because that's another topic that you go, we've got to just be doing this. Like, this is what feels safe. And at the end of the day, that safety is what allows us to be ourselves. Yeah. And it's what allows us, that's the healing that takes place for all of us in the context of marriage, when we can feel safe with each other.
Can I come back to the sex thing?
Yeah.
Real quick. I want to add this because I think it's really powerful for those of you, because we're talking about this and I don't want to just leave it hanging. And I think it's really, really helpful. My friend who we were talking about this with said what she actually has clients do is like she gets the husband and wife on a call. So she explains to them, I'm for you. I want this to be like the best thing ever, like the best thing in your marriage. But
that's because sex makes everything better.
Sex makes everything. There's an episode about that. But if I'm asking you to not have sex for at least a month. And the reason is this: that sweet woman or man who was taught to override their sexual desires, that desire, by the way, that is stronger than even the desire to protect yourself. So we're talking about the nervous system and that desire, like that instinct, you will always protect yourself first. The sexual desire is actually stronger to procreate. When God said, like, fill the world, he really meant it. Like, he really put that in. It's real strong. And so if that's even stronger and you were taught to override that, because we're not getting married at 13 when those hormones are coming on anymore. We're waiting like decades. So we've been taught to override it for decades. In order for that person's body to be rewired to actually pay attention and anticipate and actually even desire it, it has to know what it feels like to be safe and to not be affronted with requests. So that might be a conversation you need to have in your marriage of maybe this is something we should try, and to just be open to the idea that for you've been trained for a really long time in one way, and it's going to take some time to start to actually pay attention to those desires. And to let them bubble up in a way that it's genuine. It's not just appeasing or I know I should, and bless you for doing that for so long. But there is hope on the other side to rewire a body, to feel safe again, to know that this isn't just good, like God calls it blessed and holy. And once that can settle into a system, that changes the game.
Yeah. And I also think too, that in that context of, you're taking a break or whatever, that the conversations during that month have to be, there has to be some type of connection, intimacy happening, so that I think, as the Bible says, right? Like, don't, allow the marriage bed, don't stop having sex except by prayer and fasting, right?
Well, and I
for a
think
period
that's
of
a
time.
season of like prayer and fasting where you're actually healing.
Because
right?
you've got to connect. It's got to be a turning inward towards one another.
Right.
It's got to be a turning inward, not an outward, right? So it's all about leading up to that, as opposed to an outward individual.
This is what we're doing.
This is what we're doing together
for the betterment
team.
of the team.
And that's what emotional safety is all about. It's about the core building of the team, and how can we be a better team by being safe.
Yeah.
And so we're going to continue this conversation this week. And by the way, every other conversation that you have, from in-laws, we talked about this. We had a conversation called doing hard things in marriage, or talking about hard things in marriage. We can put that in the show notes as well. We can link back to that one, where we had a similar conversation, but we went through each of these kind of things. Like, you talk about in-laws and visiting parents, or visiting for the holidays, or, parenting and how you parent. Listen to the other side of your spouse's story. I hope Love Minus Fear was helpful for y'all today, and I hope that you are able to sit down with one another. Keep in mind this, that you are 100% responsible for your role in conflict. David Burns says this, and we wrote this in Famous at Home. So if you don't have the book, I encourage you to get the book. Marital satisfaction, the key to marital satisfaction is you taking 100% responsibility for your role in conflict. And when we all take 100% responsibility for our role in our conflict, and we fight for our spouse's heart more than what's going on between the two of us, fight for what's going on within the heart of your spouse more than what's going on between the two of you, and what's going on between the two of you will start to take care of itself. So let's fight for one another's hearts, because when you fight for each other's hearts, that is the context of safety. That's when everyone will feel safe. Until next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you will walk is through your front door.